Hello everyone, bonjour tout le monde, 大家好. And today I'm going to present you the difference between the GDP and the GNP. I started to have a look at the difference of these two because I was reading the stories of the romantic stories of the King of Brunei and the King of Bhutan. I was pretty much surprised that these two countries are listed on the two extreme ends of the wealth list of Asia, of the Asian countries. Brunei is one of the most wealthiest countries in Asia, and Bhutan is listed as one of the poorest and the most underdeveloped countries in Asia. And if I will look at it, it's because Brunei has oil, and also that Bhutan doesn't have oil. And also they have very, the wealth is not well distributed in the country. The king has so much of the wealth of the country, and also a few people hold most of the wealth of the country. If you do the GDP per capita, the classification of the lists is very different. So I had a look at they mostly use two methods to measure or make the list of the wealth list of all those countries. Mostly use the GDP and the GNP. GDP is the gross domestic product, and the GNP is gross national product. If you look at the terms, you just look at the adjectives, they might be pretty much similar. Well, the main difference that I can perceive from what I read is that from what is explained by Expedia is that the GDP, when they calculate the GDP of a country, they include the goods and services created by all the residents of a given country on the national soil. For example, if you calculate the GDP of the United States, you add up by including even the foreigners, the goods and product services created even by the foreigners in the United States, and you calculate the GNP, you calculate all the wealth created by all the Americans around the world. You don't calculate in the foreigners, goods and services created by the foreigners on the national soil of the United States. So most of the time it's pretty much they correspond to each other. It's not very different. But sometimes it's very different. For example, for Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste has 37% of their educated people living abroad. So if you calculate the GDP and the GNP, they are not that similar as many other countries. And I think the United States has stopped using GNP since a few decades. I'm not sure about that. And if you know many things about this already, if professionally, you're a banker or lawyer or those professions that are linked to this, you do not need to continue to watch this video, because this one is made for the gossipers or people who are not informed about this, just want to understand more when they read this kind of lists in the news, etc. So I'm done telling you about the difference of the GDP and the GNP. They have the GNP and GDP per capita. So when I read the story of the King of Brunei and the King of Bhutan, and I thought, oh, finally I found a romantic story with people who are still living. And I like to read the stories where you think, they have a lot of things that is commingled together. You have the power, you have all those kind of things that might make people So when I looked at the story of the King of Bhutan, I thought, oh, that's a really romantic story, because it said that the King of Bhutan fell in love with this girl when she was only 7 years old, and he waited for her to grow up, and then they married. They have two children together. They seem to be pretty much happy together. And I see. That's a wonderful love story. That I love reading about those kind of stories. I mean, in reality, you don't have much. You don't have many of them, and most of them don't finish well. Even the fairy tales, when they finish well, they don't really end up well. Eh, Anyway, in the end, they all end up dead anyway. So the story I thought was romantic, but when I looked into it, I was a little bit disappointed because the king, that wasn't his wife wasn't his first love. Just if you imagine, just why would a normal 20-year-old man who is not a pedophile suddenly fall in love with a 7-year-old and wait for her to grow up? And actually, the story is that he's not a pedophile, and that's pretty much sure because at the time when he was 20-something, he did have a girlfriend from Hong Kong, and he wanted to marry her. They're much enough, and the royal family, or the counselors, I don't know how you call them, and said, you can't just marry a foreign girl, it's not in our tradition, and etc. All sorts of things. They did not approve of the marriage. So he gave that up. And then he started to go out with the older cousin of his current wife, the little girl, the 7-year-old who has grown up right now. And then the royal counselors again told him that when he wanted to marry this girl, you cannot just marry someone that's not from a royal family or this and that. And so he gave that up also, and he asked them, so who I can marry? And they presented him this girl, this child, and so he waited for her to grow up to get married. And actually he wasn't in love with her to start with, and like for 5 years after their marriage he didn't even got with her or sleep with her at all. And in the end, I guess they must decide something like, well, since we are together, let's just fall in love with each other. That's much more pragmatic than what might be romantic, soft, emotional, what I might have imagined of their story.